My name is James Miller, and for most of my adult life, I believed I was living the American dream. I had built a comfortable life in Chicago with my wife, Linda, a woman I thought was my soulmate. We had a beautiful suburban home, 2 children who filled our lives with laughter, and a circle of friends who often told us we were the perfect couple. From the outside, our marriage looked unshakable, solid, enviable, almost too good to be true. But beneath that polished surface, small cracks had already begun to form. Linda worked as an executive assistant at a prestigious marketing firm, and her boss, Richard Hayes, was often praised for his charisma and leadership. I never questioned their professional closeness, because I trusted my wife completely. For years, I pushed away the uneasy feelings, convincing myself that my doubts were just insecurity. It wasn't until the day I filed for divorce that the truth finally clawed its way into the light. Linda's secret with Richard, one she had hidden for years, was exposed most devastatingly. And from that moment on, my life, my marriage, and everything I thought I knew about love would never be the same. Before we begin, I would appreciate it if you like this video, you can help me continue to spread the meaningful lesson. If you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like this video, please comment 1. If you don't like it, please comment 0 to let me know so I can make a better video for you. Now let's get started. When I look back now, it's almost laughable how blind I was to the truth. At the time, though, I was convinced I had everything a man could ask for. My name is James Miller, and for years, I lived inside what felt like a polished, picture-perfect life. We lived in a comfortable suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago, the kind with freshly cut lawns, kids riding their bikes in the cul-de-sac, and neighbors who waved as they watered their gardens. Our 2-story brick home stood proudly among the others, a symbol of stability, of success. I used to pull into our driveway after a long day at work and feel like I was the luckiest man in the world. Linda, my wife, was at the center of it all. She had that effortless charm that drew people in, warm brown eyes, a smile that lit up a room, and a way of making everyone feel like they mattered. To me, she wasn't just my wife. She was my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children. I believed with every fiber of my being that she loved me as much as I loved her. We had been married for over a decade, and in those years, we had built a life that most people envied. I had worked hard to establish my career as a financial consultant. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and it gave us the kind of security that many families dreamed of. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We could take the kids to Disney World in the summer, drive a decent SUV, and never worry about whether the bills would be paid on time. Linda had her career. She was an executive assistant at a respected marketing firm downtown. The position gave her a sense of independence and pride, and I supported that wholeheartedly. I liked knowing she had her own thing, her paycheck, her sense of worth beyond being a wife and mother. At least, that's what I told myself. I never questioned the long hours, the late nights, the constant praise she gave her boss, Richard Hayes. Why would I? Trust was the foundation of our marriage. Or so I believed. Our friends often joked that we were the golden couple. At barbecues or dinner parties, they would point to us as the ones who had it figured out. Linda and I laughed along, but inside, I felt proud. I thought we had beaten the odds, that in a world where marriages crumbled like old plaster, ours stood strong and untouchable. I wore that pride like armor, completely unaware of the cracks forming beneath. Sundays were my favorite. We'd wake up early, have pancakes with the kids, then head to church together. Linda always dressed elegantly but modestly, and I would catch men looking at her in admiration. I couldn't blame them. She was beautiful, and she carried herself with grace. On the drive home, the kids would chatter in the back seat about Sunday school lessons or the latest Marvel movie, and Linda would squeeze my hand across the console. Those moments convinced me we were solid, that our love was something unshakable. But illusions are powerful. They're like glass, clear, deceptively strong, until the slightest pressure reveals just how fragile they are. Looking back, I can see the signs that something was off. Even then, the way Linda sometimes pulled her hand away from mine a little too quickly. The excuses about late meetings, seemed to happen more often than not. The way she always defended Richard, her boss, whenever his name came up in conversation. At the time, I chalked it up to stress. Everyone gets tired. Everyone gets distant sometimes. That's what I told myself. Marriage, after all, is about compromise, about giving each other space. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that my insecurities were the problem, not her behavior. There were nights when I would walk into the living room to find her on the phone, her voice low, her expression tense. When she noticed me, she'd smile and tell me it was just work. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, the mother of my children. To suspect her of anything more felt like betraying the very vows we had made to each other. The years rolled by, and life carried on. Vacations, school events, family holidays. Each one another brushstroke on the canvas of our so-called perfect life. Friends continued to envy us. The family looked up to us. And I never once allowed myself to imagine that beneath it all, a secret was festering, growing stronger with every passing year. There's something about hindsight that makes you feel both wiser and more foolish at the same time. I see it all so clearly now. The time she came home late and smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. The time she was distant, distracted, even when we were surrounded by laughter and family. I sometimes darted away when I told her I loved her. Each of those moments was a clue, a puzzle piece I ignored because I didn't want to see the picture it formed. I wanted so badly to believe in the illusion, to protect it, to hold on to the life I thought I had built. It started small, so small that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it entirely. But marriage, at least the way I understood it, is built on the little things. The way she used to lean into me on the couch, the kiss she'd give me before I left for work, the text in the middle of the day just to say, thinking of you. Those things disappeared one by one until I found myself wondering if I was imagining the loss or if it was happening. At first, I blamed the years. They say comfort replaces passion, that routine takes the place of romance. And I tried to accept that. After all, we'd been married more than a decade. We had kids, bills, responsibilities. Our lives were not the whirlwind they once were. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. Linda started coming home later and later. What used to be the occasional late night at the office became the norm. She'd walk through the door, heels clicking on the hardwood floor, drop her purse on the counter, and sigh as if the weight of the world was on her shoulders. I'd ask how her day went, and she'd mutter something vague, busy, long, stressful. Then she'd disappear into the bedroom to shower, leaving me with the kids, dinner, and a growing sense of emptiness. There were phone calls, too. She was always glued to her phone. Even at dinner, the device seemed to buzz constantly, and when I asked who it was, she'd say it was work. Always work. Richard Hayes, her boss, was the most demanding man on the planet, needing her at all hours. She said it with a mix of annoyance and admiration, like he was brilliant but exhausting. I wanted to believe her. I told myself she was just dedicated, just hard-working. But then there were the moments when she would step out of the room to take the calls. If it was just work, why couldn't she talk in front of me? She'd lower her voice, pacing the hallway, sometimes even stepping outside into the cool night air, closing the sliding glass door behind her. I'd catch glimpses of her through the glass, hand pressed to her temple, expression tight. When she came back in, she'd act as if nothing had happened. I remember one night in particular. It was a Wednesday around 9 o'clock. I was helping our daughter, Chloe, with her math homework at the kitchen table when Linda's phone lit up. She snatched it up quickly, her eyes darting toward me, then muttered something about needing to handle a last-minute client issue. She went upstairs, leaving me with Chloe, who looked at me with confusion. "Why does Mom always have to work so late?" she asked. I had no answer, so I lied. "Because she's good at her job," I said, forcing a smile. That night, long after Linda had fallen asleep, I picked up her phone. It was the first time in our marriage that I had ever crossed that line, but I felt desperate. My hand shook as I scrolled through her messages, but most of the recent ones had been deleted. That in itself was unusual. Linda was the type who never cleared out her inbox. Why would she suddenly start deleting? The only thread that remained was a string of professional emails between her and Richard. Polished, formal, nothing incriminating. Still, the emptiness of the text log screamed louder than any message could. I put the phone back and lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every little thing I had ignored. The faint scent of cologne when she hugged me, one that wasn't mine. The way she had started working out more, updating her wardrobe, putting on makeup, even on days she claimed she had no meetings. At first, I had admired her for taking care of herself, but now I couldn't shake the suspicion that it wasn't for me. When I tried to bring it up, she deflected. One Saturday morning, as we sat on the porch drinking coffee, I asked her directly, "Is something going on, Linda? You've been so distant lately." She laughed, an awkward, almost forced laugh, and shook her head. "James, don't be ridiculous. I'm just stressed. Work has been insane. You know how it is." Her answer should have reassured me, but instead it only deepened my unease. She didn't reach out to take my hand, didn't offer comfort. She just brushed it off, as if my concerns were silly. Our intimacy began to suffer, too. The nights we used to spend talking or watching movies together became nights of silence. She would roll over, claiming exhaustion, and I would stare at her back, wondering who she was dreaming of. Was it me, or was it someone else? I hated myself for even thinking that, but the doubt gnawed at me like termites hollowing out the beams of a house. There were social moments that cut me too. At company gatherings, I started to notice how Richard hovered near her. He was always charming, always surrounded by people, but somehow Linda seemed to gravitate toward him more than anyone else. They laughed together, shared inside jokes, and when I approached, I felt like an outsider intruding on something. Richard Hayes. For the longest time, that name was nothing more than a passing reference in our household. A background character in the story of Linda's career. He was the boss, the man who signed her paycheck, the one she praised for his leadership and innovation. I never thought much about him. Why would I? In my mind, he was just another corporate suit, a man who existed in Linda's professional world but had little bearing on mine. But slowly, his presence began to creep into our marriage. Linda talked about him constantly. At first, it was small things, his vision for the company, his ability to land major clients, his knack for motivating the team. "Richard is brilliant," she would say, her eyes lighting up in a way that used to be reserved for me. "He just knows how to handle people." I tried not to let it bother me. Admiring a boss wasn't unusual. We all look up to someone in our careers, don't we? But admiration began to morph into something else. She quoted him at the dinner table, laughed at his jokes even when he wasn't there, and compared my habits to his in subtle, cutting ways. "Richard always says communication is key," she told me once, after we'd argued about something trivial. It was just one sentence, but it landed like a knife. Why was she bringing him into our arguments? Then came the schedule changes. Richard needed her to stay late. Richard asked her to travel to conferences. Richard invited her to client dinners. I found myself becoming resentful of the man I had never even met, a shadow figure who seemed to dictate more and more of my wife's time. I finally met him at one of her company's holiday parties. He was taller than I expected, with silver hair, a sharp jawline, and a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. His handshake was firm, his smile confident, too confident. He had the kind of charisma that filled a room, the type of man who made everyone else feel smaller just by existing. When he greeted Linda, his hand lingered a little too long on her back. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. I told myself it was innocent, professional, maybe even paternal. But in my gut, I knew better. "James, I've heard so much about you," Richard said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Linda always speaks so highly of you." The words were polite, but they felt rehearsed, hollow. I forced a smile, shook his hand again, and made small talk, but inside I was boiling. The way Linda looked at him, the way she laughed at his every word. It wasn't the way a woman looked at her boss. It was the way a woman looked at someone she admired, respected, and desired. After that night, I couldn't stop seeing the connection between them. It was in the way she dressed before work. Carefully chosen outfits, subtle but alluring. It was in the way she carried herself, her confidence glowing whenever she spoke about a new project Richard entrusted her with. And it was in the way she seemed more alive when she was around him, while with me, she seemed muted. One Friday evening, she called to say she'd be late because Richard wanted her to help prepare for a Monday morning presentation. I decided to surprise her. I packed the kids into the car, picked up pizza, and drove downtown to her office. I thought it would be a nice gesture. Give her a break. Let the kids see where Mom worked. When we arrived, the office lights were dim except for one corner. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw them, Linda and Richard, sitting side by side, papers spread across the table. They weren't doing anything overtly inappropriate, but the closeness, the easy intimacy between them spoke volumes. They leaned toward each other, their heads nearly touching as they looked at the same document. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm casually. I froze, the pizza box growing heavy in my hands. The kids were in the back seat, laughing and unaware. I didn't want them to see what I saw, so I drove away without going in. Linda came home hours later, apologizing for missing dinner, kissing me lightly on the cheek as if nothing was wrong. I said nothing, but inside, something cracked. The moments piled up. Late-night texts disguised as work emails, sudden weekend trips for urgent meetings, the way she became defensive if I asked too many questions. Once, when her phone buzzed and I glanced at the screen, she snatched it away so quickly you'd think it was on fire. I started to feel like a stranger in my marriage. Linda and I had once shared everything. Dreams, fears, inside jokes. But now there's a wall between us, a wall with Richard's name etched into every brick. What hurt most was the realization that she trusted him more than she trusted me. She confided in him about her career, her frustrations, and her ambitions. With me, conversations had dwindled to logistics. Who would pick up the kids? What bills needed paying? What groceries we were? If there's one thing I've learned, it's that deception doesn't happen in a single moment. It builds slowly, like dust settling in a house. You don't notice it day by day, but one morning you wake up and realize every corner is covered, every surface coated. That's how Linda's betrayal crept into my life. Not with a loud crash, not with a sudden betrayal, but with years of careful concealment. Life carried on, at least on the surface. We celebrated birthdays, attended parent-teacher conferences, and went on family vacations. There are pictures of us at Disney World, all smiling, Linda's arm wrapped around my waist, the kids grinning with ice cream cones melting in their hands. Anyone looking at that photo would see a happy American family, the perfect postcard of stability. But when I look at it now, all I see is the way Linda's smile doesn't reach her eyes, the way her body leans slightly away from mine. At the time, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Deception thrives on routine. Every weekday morning, I'd get up early, brew coffee, and head to the train station for my commute downtown. Linda's mornings followed her rhythm, getting the kids ready, dropping them at school, then driving into the city to Richard's office. On the days she claimed she was working late, I told myself it was just corporate culture, the grind of American ambition. My co-workers complained about the same thing. What made her any different? But Linda's late nights stretched into weekends. She'd tell me she needed to go into the office on a Saturday because Richard had a last-minute project. Or she'd insist on staying overnight at a hotel near the airport before an early client flight. I believed her because believing her was easier than the alternative. Over the years, the distance between us grew wider. Our conversations shrank into necessity. We talked about mortgage payments, college savings for the kids, and who was taking the car in for an oil change. The laughter, the intimacy, the companionship, they faded into silence. And whenever I tried to breach the subject, Linda always had the same response. I'm just tired. Work is overwhelming. Don't make it about us. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. Because if she was lying, then it meant my entire marriage was a fraud. It was the small inconsistencies that began to eat away at me. Once, She said she was in a meeting until 9 p.m., but when I checked her location to family phone plan, it showed her at a hotel downtown. When I confronted her, she snapped. I stopped there to grab dinner with a colleague. Stop checking up on me like I'm a child. She turned it around, made me feel like the paranoid husband, the controlling one, and I let her. Another time, she came home wearing perfume she hadn't worn in years. When I mentioned it, she brushed me off. I just felt like trying something different. But the way she said it, the way her cheeks flushed, I knew that scent wasn't meant for me. Deception, I realized, is as much about performance as it is about lies. Linda played her role flawlessly. To the kids, she was a devoted mother, cheering at soccer games and helping with science projects. To our friends, she was a charming hostess, laughing over wine in our backyard. To my parents, she was a perfect daughter-in-law, sending birthday cards and calling every Sunday. She maintained the illusion so well that even I doubted my instincts. And Richard? He remained the invisible third party in our marriage. He was careful, calculated. There were no obvious signs, no incriminating texts left on our phone, no lipstick-stained collars or unexplained receipts. Just whispers, glances, and a pattern of absence that only I seemed to notice. If I had tried to explain it to anyone else, they would have said I was imagining things. That's the cruel beauty of a long deception. It makes the truth look like madness. One evening, I arrived home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. The kids had a sleepover. Linda wasn't expecting me. I walked upstairs and found her in the bedroom, sitting on the bed with her laptop. She jumped when she saw me, quickly closing the screen. What was that? I asked. Nothing. Just work. Her tone was sharp, defensive. I pressed her, but she refused to open the laptop. James, I don't need to explain every email I send. You're suffocating me. I backed down, but not because I believed her, because I didn't have proof. And without proof, every accusation made me look like the bad guy. So I stayed silent. Year after year, I swallowed my doubts, convincing myself that maybe all marriages go through this. Maybe this was normal. Maybe I was the problem. But silence has a cost. It eats you alive from the inside. I found myself drinking more at night, scrolling through old photos of us, trying to pinpoint the moment it all went wrong. I became quieter, more withdrawn, even with the kids. My son once asked me, "Dad, why don't you laugh like you used to?" I had no answer. Through it all, Linda maintained her mask. She smiled at family gatherings. She kissed me in front of friends. She played the part so convincingly that even I sometimes wondered if I was crazy. But then in quiet moments, I would catch her staring off into space. Her phone clutched tightly in her hand, a small smile tugging at her lips. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The hardest part wasn't betrayal itself. It was the gaslighting, the way she made me feel like my suspicions were baseless, that my pain was irrational. She convinced me I was a paranoid one, while she carried on her affair in plain sight. And yet I stayed, for the kids, for the illusion, for the hope that maybe, somehow, we could go back to the way things were. I thought if I worked harder, loved her more, gave her more space, things would change. But nothing did. Looking back, I realized Linda and Richard thrived because of my silence. Every time I ignored a red flag, I permitted them to continue. Every time I doubted myself, I handed them another year of freedom. Their deception lasted as long as it did because I allowed it. But the thing about lies is that they don't stay buried forever. Eventually, the truth claws its way to the surface. And when it does, it destroys everything in its path. I didn't know it then, but the years of deception were coming to an end. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just end my marriage. It would shatter Linda's entire world. The decision to file for divorce didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It wasn't like I woke up one morning with clarity. It was a slow accumulation, years of quiet suffering, of gnawing suspicion, of swallowing truths I wasn't ready to face. One day, I looked in the mirror and realized the man staring back at me wasn't someone I recognized. The laughter lines had hardened into permanent frowns. My eyes looked hollow, tired. I had been living a lie for too long. So I called a lawyer. It felt surreal. Sitting in a downtown Chicago office across from a man in a crisp navy suit, telling him I wanted out. I explained the years of distance, the late nights, the gaslighting, the way Linda had become a stranger in my own home. He listened quietly, nodded, then slid a packet of papers across the mahogany desk. If you're ready, he said, we can start today. Filing those papers felt like ripping off a bandage I had worn for years. Painful, yes, but also liberating. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. When I told Linda, her reaction wasn't shock. It was anger. Her face twisted with indignation as she slammed her coffee mug on the counter. Divorce? Are you serious, James? After everything we've built, you're just going to throw it away? I wanted to laugh at the hypocrisy. Throw it away? She had been throwing away for years, piece by piece, night by night, in Richard's arms. But I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I stayed calm because I knew something she didn't. The truth was finally coming for her. The weeks leading up to our first court hearing were tense. We barely spoke, except through lawyers. The kids noticed, of course, though we tried to shield them. I hated that they were caught in the middle of this. But I also knew staying in a toxic marriage would have been worse. Then came discovery. The part of divorce proceedings where both sides are required to disclose financial records, communications, and any other relevant evidence. I had handed over everything. Bank statements, tax returns, emails. I had nothing to hide. Linda, however, dragged her feet. Her lawyer requested extensions, citing complexities in her work schedule. But secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. One evening, my lawyer called me. His voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before, something between excitement and grim satisfaction. James, he said, we received copies of Linda's company emails. You're going to want to sit down for this. The next day, I sat in his office as he slid a thick stack of printed emails across the desk. My hands trembled as I began to read. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't professional. It was undeniable. There were late-night messages between Linda and Richard, full of inside jokes, flirtation, and eventually explicit confessions of love. Emails about missing last night already, about hotel reservations for the next trip, about how hard it is to keep pretending at home. There were even attachments, receipts for dinners charged to company accounts, hotel confirmations in her name and his. Each page felt like a dagger, but alongside the pain was a growing fire. Finally, I had proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that all the years of suspicion, all the cracks I tried to plaster over, had been real. When the day of a hearing came, I walked into that courthouse with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. The marble floors echoed beneath my shoes as I entered the courtroom. Linda a few steps ahead of me. She looked immaculate as always, tailored suit hair perfectly styled, but there was a flicker of nerves in her eyes. The judge took her seat, and the proceedings began. Our lawyers presented their cases, assets, custody, and financial support. It was all standard routine until my attorney cleared his throat and said, Your Honor, we would like to introduce evidence relevant to the character and credibility of Mrs. Miller. Linda stiffened. Her lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. And then, one by one, my attorney laid out the evidence. The emails, the hotel receipts, the late-night messages left nothing to the imagination. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of paper shuffling and Linda's shallow breathing. Her face flushed red, her eyes darting between me, the judge, and the damning words in front of her. For once, she had no defense, no clever deflection, no gaslighting. The truth was in black and white, undeniable. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I sat there, calm and steady, while inside a storm of vindication roared. For years, she had made me feel like I was losing my mind. For years, she had painted me as paranoid, insecure. And now here it was, the truth exposed for all to see. Richard's name appeared over and over in those emails, tied him directly to her betrayal. I knew word would spread. In corporate circles, reputations are fragile, and once shattered, they rarely recover. Linda wasn't just losing her marriage that day. She was losing her career, her image, the carefully constructed facade she had worn for so long. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was stern. Mrs. Miller, these documents are deeply concerning. They demonstrate a pattern of deception that this court cannot ignore. Linda's eyes welled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of exposure, of fear. For the first time, she wasn't in control. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the years I had lost, the love I had given freely to someone who betrayed it. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that the truth had finally come to light. As I stepped into the bright Chicago sun, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in silence. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. And on that day, the truth had spoken louder than anything I could have ever said. The weeks following the courtroom revelation were some of the strangest of my life. It felt as if a storm had ripped through my world, tearing apart everything I thought I knew. Yet when the wind settled, when the dust cleared, I was still standing. Bruised, yes, shaken, but standing nonetheless. And Linda, well, she was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had destroyed with her own hands. The fallout was immediate. Richard Hayes, the man she had staked everything on, resigned from his firm within days of the evidence becoming public. The board couldn't tolerate the scandal of an executive sleeping with his assistant, charging hotel bills to company accounts, and jeopardizing client trust. For all his charisma and charm, Richard was no match for the corporate world's appetite for clean reputations. In America, it only takes one headline to end a career. Linda's fate wasn't much better. Word spread quickly in our community. Neighbors who once envied our perfect marriage now whisper about the betrayal, the affair, the emails. The woman who used to host backyard barbecues and book club meetings now avoided even stepping outside. Every sideways glance, every half-hidden smirk from our neighbors reminded her the truth she couldn't bury anymore. She tried to salvage her job, but without Richard to shield her, the firm had no reason to keep her. She was quietly let go, her exit buried under the language of company restructuring. I knew better. They didn't want a scandal attached to their name. She had gone from being respected and admired to a liability. At home, she unraveled. I could see in the way she carried herself when she came to pick up the kids for her visitation weekends. Her shoulders hunched, her makeup smudged, her once proud smile gone. She avoided eye contact, barely speaking to me. The woman who had once held all the power in our marriage now looked like a shell of herself. And me? I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to scream or rage or plot elaborate revenge. The truth had done all the work for me. My revenge was silence, dignified, steady silence. I showed up for my kids. I went to work. I lived my life. And in contrast, her world fell apart. There's a saying I've heard before. The best revenge is living well. At the time, I never believed it. I thought revenge had to be fire and fury, about making someone suffer in a way they made you suffer. But as I watched Linda lose everything she valued, her career, her reputation, her dignity, I realized the saying was true. I didn't have to lift a finger. All I had to do was step back and let the consequences of her choices catch up with her. The kids, of course, were the hardest part. I never wanted them to feel caught in the crossfire, never wanted them to see their mother as a villain. I shielded them as best I could, keeping the details of the affair away from them. They knew we were divorcing. They knew things had changed, but they didn't need to know why. That was Linda's burden to carry. I'll never forget one Sunday afternoon, a few months after the divorce was finalized. I was at the park with my son, tossing a football back and forth. Out of nowhere, he said, "Dad, you seem happier now." The words hit me harder than any football ever could. He was right. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from suspicion. Free from deception. Free from the heavy weight of pretending. It was as if a fog had lifted, and I could finally see the world again. Meanwhile, Linda kept trying to reach out to me, not with apologies, but with half-hearted attempts at justification. She sent emails late at night, Long paragraphs about how she never meant to hurt me, how things just happened, how Richard had made her feel seen in ways I hadn't. I read them once, then deleted them. What was there to say? The time for explanations was over. She had made her choices. The financial settlement was fair, but it didn't save her. She got a portion of the house equity, a share of the retirement accounts, and child support for the kids. But money couldn't buy back her reputation. It couldn't erase the humiliation she faced every time she walked into the grocery store or scrolled through social media and saw the judgment in people's comments. In our suburban world, word travels fast, and betrayal lingers like smoke long after the fire is gone. As for Richard, last I heard, his wife had filed for divorce, too. His kids stopped speaking to him. He moved out of his fancy downtown condo and into some rented apartment across the city. The empire he had built, professional and personal, crumbled overnight. And the irony? He and Linda didn't even end up together. After all those years of secrecy, of risking everything, they couldn't withstand the weight of the truth. It turned out their connection only thrived in the shadows. Once the spotlight hit, it withered. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that enjoyed watching it all collapse. There was satisfaction in seeing justice served without my having to dirty my hands. But more than that, there was peace. Peace in knowing I had survived. Peace in realizing that my silence, my dignity, my refusal to stoop to her level, that was my ultimate revenge. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip behind the Chicago skyline, I feel something I hadn't felt in years. Contentment. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. It's honest. My kids are thriving, and I'm rebuilding piece by piece. As for Linda, she's just another chapter in my story, a painful one, but not the ending. Her lies define those years, but they don't define me anymore. She lost everything that mattered to her, while I found something she never had. The strength to walk away with my head held high. Silent revenge isn't about making noise, about shouting your triumph to the world. It's about patience, about letting time and truth do what they do best. And in the end, it's about walking away, not with anger, but with freedom. That's exactly what I did. And I wouldn't trade that victory for anything. And that brings us to the end of my story. From the outside, my marriage looked like the picture of perfection, until the years of secrets finally surfaced, and the truth brought everything crashing down. Linda lost everything she had tried to protect, while I walked away with something far more valuable: peace, dignity, and freedom. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't about destroying the other person. It's about reclaiming yourself and letting the truth speak louder than anything else. But now, I want to turn it over to you. Think about everything you've just heard. What lesson stands out to you the most? Maybe it's about the importance of trusting your instincts. Maybe it's about the danger of ignoring red flags. Or maybe it's about realizing that silence, patience, and living well can sometimes be the most powerful form of revenge. What's one thing you've learned from this story that you'll apply in your own life? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please share them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, share it with someone who might need to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Your support helps us keep creating content that connects, inspires, and sparks conversation.